Everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. You cannot change the past. You lost somebody, you went through some horrific trauma, and it's hard to wrap your head around it being perfect, but it's perfect because that's the way it happened. You can't change that. Right? This is the isness of the condition. I lost friends. I went through all this. I've been through a brutal divorce. I've been through all kinds of pain, right? It happened. It's perfect. It happened. That's the isness of it. Now, once I accept that the isness, then I can free myself from those second darts and say, got it. Now what do I do with it?
I am honored today to introduce our community to Akshay Nanavati. Akshay is the author of the book Fearvana, and he is a modern day explorer. And I am really excited to have him share with us about something that he's doing that's uncommon, really, really uncommon. So, Akshay, I don't want to tell your story too much. We're just going to dive right in. Tell us a little bit about your background, what brought you to the place in your life that you were able to create the book Fearvana.
Sounds good. A little bit about what led me to this ethos and lifestyle that I now live. I was born in India to a relatively, I wouldn't say wealthy, but middle class family. So I didn't really know a lot of suffering. We moved from India to Singapore to the US. Soon after moving to Austin, Texas, at the age of 13, I got very heavily into drugs, into alcohol, used to cut myself, burn myself, very, very self destructive. I lost two friends to addiction and was going down that path myself until I saw the movie Black Hawk Down. And watching that movie changed the trajectory of my life. It made me question this very selfish, meaningless life I was living. And almost overnight, I decided to then join the military. It took me a year and a half to get in because I have flat feet, I have scoliosis, I have a blood disorder that two doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. But I fought my way in and I enlisted in the United States Marines. And there it kind of birthed everything that I am today. It taught me the beauty of suffering. It taught me the beauty of struggle and the ability within each of us to transcend that struggle, not just for our own selves, but for a purpose higher than ourselves, right? In the Marines, you live for the good of the group, not for yourself. Your men and your mission are far more important than your own well-being. And that's profoundly beautiful to experience that. So after getting into that world, I started to look for other ways to challenge myself. And I got big into outdoor sports. I used to be scared of everything. So I started confronting my fears of heights, of tight spaces. I went mountain climbing, rock climbing, skydiving, cave diving, caving, kind of you name it. You know, every outdoor sport you can think of, nature became my playground to explore the limitlessness of the human potential. And then in 2007, I was deployed to Iraq as an infantry Marine. When I came back from the war, I really struggled. I lost a friend to the war, lost junior Marines to suicide. I was diagnosed with PTSD, started drinking heavily, was at a point where I was drinking liters of vodka, just, I mean, like a full bottle a day for days on end. And one morning, after 5 days of binge drinking, I woke up and I was seconds away from slitting my own wrists. I walked over to my kitchen, picked up a knife, and that moment was kind of the rock bottom moment I needed in many ways to climb out of this abyss that I had found myself in. And so I started delving deep into neuroscience, into psychology, into spirituality, started doing the inner work to confront my own demons. And that's what led me to this idea and this ethos of Fearvana, that fear and ultimately its cousins of stress, anxiety, pain, suffering, they are not the antithesis of nirvana. They can be an access point to it because we're all going to experience suffering, right? It's part of the human condition, but we demonize it as something bad and it doesn't have to be bad. And so that's what then led me to writing the book Fearvana, getting back into outdoor sports, getting back into ultra running. I built a business around Fearvana, got big time into adventuring. And now currently what has led me to this mission that I'm on 1 month from today, where I fly to Antarctica in my attempt to do the world's first solo coast to coast ski crossing of the entire continent of Antarctica, where I'll be completely alone for 110 days, dragging a 400-pound sled for 1,700 miles across the entire continent. Been my world for the last 4 years, is training the mind, body, and spirit for this.
This is amazing. You're doing something that nobody's done on the planet before that we know of. And my first question to you is why? Why are you so driven to do this now?
Yeah, great question. I think so. Every big goal, I think there's at a meta level, it ultimately should have two kind of motivations, one, a selfish one and a selfless one. And over the years of pushing myself and doing everything I've done, I think I'm always looking for the two goals. So selfishly for me, this is about tapping into my own inner Buddhahood, that divinity that we all have within us, right? To go into the depths of my own soul and the depths of the human soul to unearth the treasures that can only be found in the extremes of hardship, the extremes of solitude, the extremes of suffering, away from the decadence and distraction of the normal world to see what I can unearth. And in that silence, you really start to hear. This is obviously not my first expedition, so I've gotten a small taste of it before on solo expeditions, from spending 10 days in a dark room by myself, from running ultra marathons for 24 hours, and this is pushing it so far beyond, like beyond being the first ever crossing of the continent. It'll also be the longest solo expedition in history, both in terms of the distance covered as well as time alone on ice. And so I'm excited to see what that will reveal. It's a very spiritual journey for me. And that unearthing, that exploration of the soul is why I go. Now, selflessly, for me, it is about bringing the wisdom back to share with others who are suffering. Because I have the privilege that I get to choose my own struggle. That is a privilege, right? I've been to the darkest corners of the world. I've worked with survivors of sex trafficking, people in conflict zones, people in extreme poverty. I've been to war and seen people who don't have the luxury to choose their own struggle. I do, right? And that's a privilege. It's a gift that I'm grateful for. But because I get to go to such an extreme edge, I get to go open doors that aren't otherwise opened. And to me, it's a responsibility to bring back the wisdom that I find on the edge to share with others who are suffering. And for me, it really is a responsibility. Like when I was in Iraq, for example, my vehicle drove over an active bomb that for some reason did not explode. Just God knows why. My friend's vehicle drove over a bomb, it exploded, and he was killed. And so since that experience, since all these experiences I've had of seeing people suffer in some of the harshest places on earth, to me, I believe there's a debt I owe for this life that I've been gifted. Even just by being born to good parents who loved me and gave me a good life, I was automatically blessed with a million times more opportunities than so many others on earth. So to earn that life, to pay this debt that I have for life. And look, I'm not saying this is a paradigm that everybody must think. It's a paradigm that works for me. And so my responsibility is to earn this life and to go out on the edges. That's how I do it. We all have our own vehicles of service, right? You are obviously serving humanity in your own beautiful way. And this is my vehicle of service. And so to go out there, to see what I find and to share that. And by sharing it, because I get to open such extreme doors of the soul, I'm able to help people in the normal world who are suffering and find weapons to navigate their own darkness and find their way into the light. And that's what I do. That's why I share. That's why I speak. We met through me speaking on a stage and write the books that I do and do the work that I do to help others navigate and turn their suffering, their fear into nirvana.
You are like I don't know, you're an alchemist of sorts to me, somebody who is taking the hardest, most challenging, trauma filled experiences that the human soul can go through. And you are transmuting it, you're changing it into something else. You're changing it into power, into energy, into clarity. You're proving that resilience can be born out of really the hardest things in our life that we can go through. And to me, that's so inspiring. And I'm grateful that our paths have crossed because, there aren't a lot of people like you on the planet. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. I sincerely don't understand how you have so much courage. And I'm sure a lot of people think what you're doing might be insane because the reality is you could die. You could go on this journey 110 days alone, going across a continent, carrying your supplies. No one's there to help you. Your wife is not there. It's freezing cold. You don't know what you're going to encounter. And then what? So, can you speak a little bit, Akshay, to us about where does this courage come from? You're so unique, and your story and your journey and what you're seeking, it's beyond uncommon.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for the acknowledgement. So one, just to clarify, it's not as dangerous as people think. I just want to clarify that.
Please help us because we're
of course. And it's fair. It's an understandable. Like if people
Okay.
compared it to climbing Everest or even to Free Solo, that documentary of Alex Honnold, people compare it to that. But polar travel, it's not as dangerous as, let's say, mountain climbing or free climbing, but it's a lot more mental and physical suffering. Like I'll be just dragging a heavy sled, yes, in very extreme temperatures for 110 days, but in flat white nothingness. The biggest danger I have is a very small section of the journey where there are crevasses that I can fall into. But even those have been mitigated significantly. I'll be doing safety checks. So if I were to fail, the most likely outcome of that failure would simply mean that I couldn't cover the distance that I needed to cover in the 110 days that I have. And from wherever I will be at the time, I'll have to be picked up. Now, this is not to say that, yes, I could still fall into a crevasse and die, but the point is it's not nearly as dangerous that the perception might be. And I just want to clarify that. But to answer the question, yes, it still takes a lot of courage because 110 days, I will be completely alone. I'll be geographically the most isolated human being on Earth in the most savage conditions on Earth. As you know, I've lost 2 fingers to frostbite out there. Temperatures can drop to minus 40 degrees. It's unforgiving. It is cold. And yes, there are still dangers. So where that courage comes from, this is not built in me overnight. As I mentioned, like I used to be scared when I was a kid of everything. My mom tells me this story that when I was younger, I was scared of going on roller coasters. I was even scared of a Ferris wheel, let alone a roller coaster. So I systematically built myself into this person I am by stepping into things that scared me one step at a time. I was scared of heights, so I went rock climbing. I was scared of tight spaces, so I went caving. And all these things scared me. To this day, I think I shared this story with you when we met. I was more scared of asking my wife, now wife, out on a date than I am of doing all the crazy things I do. In fact, she heard me on a podcast saying that I'm more scared of asking a woman on a date than I am of going to war. So she heard that and asked me out. And I was so nervous on our first date. Even today, for example, so I've had to do some dental checkups and dental procedures before going just to make sure there's no issues. I'm fixing every aspect of my body. And I don't like going to the dentist. There was nerves. I don't like a needle in my mouth. And there was a time in my life, like many years ago when I was a kid, I wouldn't admit that. Like if I was asked at the dentist, are you scared? I'd be like, no, I'm not scared. I got this. But I would be scared. And so today, now I can acknowledge that I was scared. I didn't like it. I felt a little anxious. But the key is it's not about demonizing the fear or the anxiety. The first step to moving through it is to accept and acknowledge it. So I even told the dentist, like she could see, like she asked, were you a little nervous? I said, yeah, I am. I'm not a big fan of this experience, whereas I wouldn't admit that, but now I can own up to it, but I still got it done. I still got the procedures done as much as I didn't enjoy it. Right. So the point is when you accept that the fear is okay, that's a foundation of moving through it. And especially for young men, but I would say people in general, there's this idea that by admitting you're scared means you're weak. And that's not the case. I'm terrified of going to Antarctica, but that's one of the key things of doing it. Every big goal, writing a book was scary. Being in this relationship was scary at first, building a business, of course, I'm sure you can relate, is scary. There's so many things that could go wrong that do go wrong, right? Doing everything worthwhile is scary. But I built myself up into the kind of person that could face that fear, accept that the fear is okay, and then seek out a path to moving through that fear. And systematically for me, now, look, crossing Antarctica is certainly not the only path to enlightenment. But for me, the more I was pushing myself physically, mentally, spiritually, the more I started looking for that next edge. What's that next thing? What's that next thing? And this is kind of as big as you can go. It's the last remaining expedition in Antarctica, in Antarctic exploration that hasn't been accomplished yet. A full coast-to-coast crossing without dogs or kites as support. So that was the draw for me. Can I push the boundaries of the human potential, right? Like the Roger Bannister 4-minute mile effect. How far can we push it? And can I see what I could find? But it doesn't mean I'm not scared. So I just learned to be more comfortable with the experience of fear, to own up to it, to accept it, and then that's what allowed me to move through it.
Where did you get this idea? How did this particular journey come to you? And how did you know that this was the thing for you to do in order to attempt to reach your own state of nirvana or enlightenment?
When I got into outdoor sports, as I mentioned, I tried everything you could try, like kind of every outdoor sport you can kind of think of. I've dabbled in and played in. And out of all the sports I experienced, polar exploration, polar travel was more mental and physical suffering than anything else. So, for example, as I mentioned, it gets compared to mountain climbing a lot. But when you're climbing a mountain, every day as you go up and down the mountain, the terrain is different. The views are different. It's dynamic. So it engages the mind more. Now, it is more dangerous, and I've experienced this on mountains that I've climbed. You could fall off the mountain. So it's far more dangerous. But because of that, the danger kind of engages your mind and puts you in flow a lot easier. Like when I was climbing on Denali at 16,000 feet, a very thin ridge line, 1,000-foot drop on each side of you, your mind's not wandering. It's not thinking about other things. It's right there in front of you. There's a beauty to that. There's a comfort to that because your mind doesn't have the luxury or the burden to wander. What drew me to polar travel was because of how difficult it is. Every day in Antarctica, except for a handful of days where you can see some mountain ranges, for the most part, every day is flat white nothingness. That means you have to deal with no stimuli to engage consciousness. The environment is not dangerous, so it doesn't force you into flow. You're just walking. Imagine just walking, staring at a white wall. That means your mind will start going places. And that is the most daunting thing about this journey. Imagine staring at a white wall, just walking into it for 12 hours a day. Your mind's going to go everywhere. And as you know, today's world, we do everything we can to distract ourselves from ourselves, right? So for me, the draw was in polar travel, that mental challenge of being with the stillness of mind and allowing myself to surrender to see what will be revealed. There's moments where it absolutely sucks. Like I've had moments on polar expeditions where 10 minutes, I look at my watch and I thought maybe I've gone for an hour and it's been 10 minutes because your mind is just eating at you because of how much work you're doing. You're struggling, you're suffering, you're kind of wishing for it to be over. But navigating that is the beautiful thing, right? Can I be more present? Can I not think about day 100 when I'm out there, right? Can I not think about the next hour and just be here and allow myself to have that conversation with what I call God, but call it the universe, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, to experience that. So that's what initially drew me to polar travel, was not just the struggle, but the thing that the struggle gives you access to, which is self-transcendence. And self-transcendence to me is an expression of God, an expression of divine, to transcend the self in service of something greater. And that service of something greater also means your higher self, but it also means the mission that's bigger than you, the people you serve through your work, right? And so that's what drew me. And then this specific mission was, I mean, it's the culmination of polar travel, right? It's one of the biggest expeditions that hasn't been done. So when I got into polar travel, I was like, I started pushing the edge further and further into polar travel. And this was the biggest draw, the opportunity to spend 110 days completely alone. I mean, what a gift, to experience that kind of silence, to get to hear things you don't hear in this world. And so being that it was the greatest Antarctic exploration that hasn't been accomplished, that was part of the draw that called me to it.
That's beautiful. So you've had to overcome so much in your life with your journey. You've had to deal with addiction. You've had to deal with extreme grief, depression, shame, guilt, all of the most challenging emotional states that a human being can go through, you have held and sat with and worked your way out of. And you have some amazing insights. You're an extreme researcher. You have some amazing connections. And you have put together in your book, Fearvana, basically like a recipe for how to navigate through some of the hardest emotional states that we go through as human beings. Coming out of the last couple years pandemic, mental health issues are through the roof. Young men around the world, young women too, but young men in particular, are really struggling these days for a lot of different reasons. But I wanted to see if we could just kind of go through layer by layer some of the insights that you gleaned during your process and that are outlined in your book, specifically to help our audience of listeners maybe accelerate their processing of these things and to help them become unstuck, because you talk about that a lot. The first thing that I want to talk to you about, and I want to understand a little bit more, is just your journey with, let's call it addiction, dependence on chemicals, substances. If you had a nugget of knowledge that you'd like to share with our audience about, listen, if you're somebody who every single day, like you, the bottle of vodka was talking to you, and it is really debilitating. You're not a functional alcoholic. You are somebody who is really in a really bad, dire straits situation. First couple steps somebody could take if they have this awareness, if this content passes them and they're ready to shift gears and make some changes in life. What's the first thing that you have to do?
For most people, I would say, getting some outside help is a really good place to start. So that could mean going to a rehab. It could mean going to 12 step. Now, I didn't do those things, but that doesn't mean I know a lot of friends who it's worked for, So depending where you are in your journey, but to get some perspective outside of yourself, because when you're in that pit, in that abyss, often people, like I've spoken a lot around the world, people will then share my story to someone they know who's struggling. But when you're in the abyss, hearing a story like mine doesn't make you feel good. It makes you feel shittier about yourself. And I experienced this when I was in that pit. I didn't want to hear anything about how amazing people, what amazing things people can do. It just made me feel even shittier, like I am so shitty, I can't do that, right?
Yeah.
So just getting outside help to get 1 inch beyond the pain. And when you're first starting out, even one day sober is worth celebrating. So you got to stack the small wins, right? So, okay, this is the first day I'm sober. Now, today I don't celebrate my daily sobriety, but today I'm very different than when I was in that pit, right? So when I first started, I was celebrating it. But the thing then is, like, there's a great quote about addiction that says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And that means connection to others, connection to God, connection to yourself, to form deeper connections. Like the reason we're doing things like drinking or drugs is because we are escaping some pain. It's a symptom, right? It's a symptom that is an escape from some underlying cause. So you got to go there. For me, I had to confront my demons from the war, the guilt I felt around it, the struggle with normalcy, with the mundane. My desire to seek out that next edge became its kind of own addiction that I was escaping from. So today I'm still doing these things like seeking out next edge, but I'm not doing it as a vehicle to run away from. I'm doing it as a vehicle to search for, as a moving toward as opposed to escaping from. But so in that deep pit, you just are getting some outside help to start at least taking a small step. Forget about the dream you want to get to, especially when you're starting out. Like it's about, at the core of human behavior, there's two forces: desire to avoid pain, desire to gain pleasure. And when you're in the pit, forget about the pleasure you want to get to. All you have to do is move away from pain, and you have to just get one step. Okay, I'm sober for 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. Got it. Now let me explore why I was drinking. Let me explore the pit. Let me go in it. And look, there's nothing comfortable about this process. This is the key thing too. There's no easy way out. The only way out is through. You have to face your demons. You have to sit with it. And I think one of the biggest flaws in our approach to mental health is the belief that it is a state without tension. It is a state without fear, without anxiety, without stress. We demonize these emotions as bad. But I had post-traumatic stress, for example, but that doesn't mean I had post-traumatic stress disorder. Everybody told me to make a concrete example of this, of how to reframe your relationship to your own pain. Everybody told me don't feel guilty. It wasn't my fault that my friend died. I mean, I can't control what happens in war. It happens the way it happens. But the fact is, the guilt was simply an expression of love, a love
Yeah.
for my brother in arms. So instead of demonizing the guilt as bad and trying to make it go away, I just reframed it. For a long time, what I had was a picture of my friend that I lost in the war up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life." The guilt became my fuel. It became my ally. It drove me to doing something worthy with this life. So you got to take whatever your own pain, whatever your demons, and find a way to turn it into something beautiful.
And you helped me with my next question, which was how did you manage through the guilt that you
Mm-hmm.
were feeling? So thank you so much for that. What do you think is the first step somebody should take if they're in the pit? It might not be addiction related though. Let's say it's a chronic depression, anxiety, overwhelm. There's a lot of things right now. We're in the middle of dynamic uncertainty, chaos, ambiguity, potentially World War III, literally right now. So for people that are really struggling, personally with depression, anxiety, overwhelm, and then they hear the news of all this geopolitical stuff, it doesn't help. So for somebody who's in the depths of it, not necessarily with addiction, but just dark emotional stuff, what do you have to say to those individuals in terms of taking that and starting to work through it?
Think first step is that reframe of the idea of mental health. Like I said earlier, right? Like mental health does not mean a state without anxiety, without fear, without stress. It's the belief that it is what creates us more harm. So accepting that it's okay. Like my mantra is inner peace is not the absence of chaos or conflict, it's the acceptance of them. It's the acceptance of them. So first saying, got it. Okay, there's chaos in the external world. There's chaos in our internal world, right? Okay, got it. Now, this is easier said than done. I get it. But that's what the first section of Fearvana is called: awareness and acceptance. So awareness of what is, and then acceptance. And then you have to bring your world to what can you control. Now, we can see there's tons happening in the world, right? Like you said,
Right.
break potential world war. I can't control it. You can't control it. But what I can control is my immediate world here. I can control maybe the one life I can help of the person next to me, somebody listening to this podcast. Where can I make that impact? Now you translate your own pain to something bigger than you, right? So, but bring it to your control. So if you find yourself delving into the pit because you're consuming the darkness of the human condition. I mean, there's enough darkness in the human condition. It's not hard to find that. We can look anywhere and you will see that, right? You have to say, okay, look, there's nothing I can do about this. Let me sidestep that. It's not about burying your head in the sand, but if you want to call it that temporarily, at least to get yourself out of the pit, got it. Let me turn off the news. Let me disregard all the information because it's beyond my control. What can I control? And if you're in that pit, depending on where you are, right? Like if you look at the evolution, 0 to 10, 0 being I'm on the depth of suicide, 10 being life could not be better, on the cusp of mastery. There's different tools to get from 0 to 3 versus 3 to 7 versus 7 to 9 and 9 to 10, right? So at first, as I said, it's about getting out of pain. Forget about the pleasure. So now, okay, I'm going through this. Now I have to sit with it. Now let me ignore information that's happening. Let me bring my world back into what I can control. What I can control was this day. This day I was sober. This day I struggled, but I had a small victory. I did 5 push-ups. What like I worked with a client once. He was in this kind of funk, and I said, "All right, we're going to start with just 5 push-ups." Now, for me, that might not be the end of the world, but for somebody else, 5 push-ups could be their crossing Antarctica, right? So you have to stack the wins over time. So small steps. Start moving the body a bit. That'll help build the mind a little bit as well, you know. And then once you get out of the pain, but again, the key thing is you have to go confront whatever was driving you into that pit. And that means being with it. That means sitting with it. There was a great quote from this French philosopher, Blaise Pascal, who said, I firmly believe that all of humanity's problem stems from man's inability to sit by himself alone. So it's our distraction from ourselves that I too, even Carl Jung said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And our world feeds into distractions more and more and more with our little tools right here, right?
Yep.
Everything we can to distract ourselves from ourselves. So if you struggle with stillness, sit with yourself for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20. When you do that, you will start bringing to surface things that you have not confronted because you were distracting yourself from yourself. And when you allow those things to rise to the surface, now you can face them. Now you can decide what you do with them. Now you can turn your guilt into something beautiful. You can turn your pain into something beautiful. So as I mentioned earlier when we spoke, I have this belief that I owe a debt for this life. Now, you don't have to think the way I do, but the point is I've turned all my pain into a paradigm that works for me. It drives me into doing something meaningful with this life I've been gifted. So whatever your pain, right? You'll see people, mothers who've lost kids will then start a charity for cancer or whatever it may be, right? Now you turn your pain, and this doesn't mean the pain goes away. This is another
Right.
big thing that I cannot stress enough, especially if you've lost somebody. I just did a talk a few weeks ago, and this woman had lost her husband just 4 months before my talk, and she was crying and she was talking to me and sharing this with me. The grief of that is not going to go away, if possibly ever, but you can turn that into something beautiful. So it's not about making the pain go away. It's about acknowledging it, being with it, and finding something to turn it into, channeling it into a worthy purpose once you've gotten out of that 0 state and moved from a 0 to 3. And now it's okay. Now there's a light that I can see. Okay, what is that light? I want to channel it. You have to channel your pain into something, what I call your worthy struggle, right? We all need a path in life. If you don't pursue a path, then you're living in a void. And as they say, an idle mind is the devil's playground. So channeling it into something worthwhile once you've gotten out of the deep pit, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. One of the really cool things about the work that I get to do is I get to be on the receiving end of what I call love letters from customers, people who have had some sort of really challenging issue in their life, specifically around energy. And when they get their energy back, I get to hear what they're doing with that energy. And it's really amazing because people are utilizing C60 to essentially power their purpose. And I think that you're one of these very unique human beings on the planet today who is, in my opinion, you are 100% on purpose, on mission, on time, doing what you literally, it seems to me, your soul, you are embodying your soul's purpose and you're living it through your physical action. In your book, you talk about different laws or rules or philosophies that you have uncovered in life that help you reframe whatever it is that you're dealing with. Do you mind, just for a few inspiring points for people who might be interested in exploring your book, for us to dive into a few of these? So, for example, can you talk to me a little bit about what you think about the law of love and hate?
Hmm. So this is the idea that, we again we demonize hate as something bad, right? And I'll actually talk about it from a meta level of dualities. You might have heard me talk about this when we spoke.
Yeah.
So even Fearvana is this idea that fear and nirvana, two seemingly contradictory ideas, but are in fact complementary. And throughout the human experience, there are a series of dualities. So there's masculine, feminine, ego, humility, fear, nirvana, pain, pleasure, contentment, discontentment. And we often demonize one side as bad. Pain is bad. The darkness is bad. If you look at darkness and light as another one, hate is bad. But if you want to find true inner peace, mastery of the soul, it's about recognizing that neither is bad or good, but both can coexist. You can't have a summit without a valley. You can't have a light without darkness. The moment you start to embrace both forces as okay, that both forces can coexist simultaneously, you can find true inner peace. So even hate, for example, like one of the things I have as fuel when I'm going to Antarctica, I have a list of what I call the enemy list. And I have an
Okay.
enemy list. And look, I'm not always living there. I think tremendously about gratitude for people like you, people like Michael Fishman, the amount of my wife, the amount of people that have come together to make this possible. And I live in a space of deep gratitude very often. But from time to time, it is incredibly valuable to go into a place where I think about those who promised they would support me but didn't, people who have doubted me, people who hate on me, the haters. And I'm like, good, I can't wait to show you what I will do when I pull this off, right? So I even have a list that I've on my phone of enemies that have chosen to reject me, to hate me, did not support me. And I'm like, awesome. So that's a place to go. The point is, as I've been saying, even when confronting our own mental health, like being okay with our own darkness and our pain and our demons. Our demons are not our enemy. We've all experienced some pain in life, and you're going to experience some more. That's just the nature of the human condition. And that's going to leave us with pain, with grief, with hardship, with sadness. But they do not have to be our enemy. We can turn our demons into our allies, and the light and the darkness can coexist. And that I think is at a meta level, the key of true spiritual mastery is recognizing these two seemingly contradictory forces can, in fact, not only can, but must coexist. And when they do, you can move through it with greater joy, fulfillment, and peace.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's always been my belief and understanding that everything in this dimension is allowed to exist. So the quicker that we can accept it, the sooner that we can transmute it, move through it, etc. Talk to me a little bit about your understanding of negativity bias.
Psychologists call this term the negativity bias, that we are more likely to focus on the danger and the negative than the positive. The reason this evolutionary exists is, I mean, if I'm a caveman living in archaic times, it is more valuable for me to focus on the danger than if I miss a beautiful sunset, no big deal. I'll still live the next day. But if I miss the tiger or lion around the corner, I will die. So I'm more wired to focus on the dangers and the threats because they are a threat to my life. So our brain is still today this caveman or cavewoman like archaic brain that exists. So everybody can relate to this. Why do we naturally tend to focus more on the negative, right? You'll see this with people. I mean, even as parents, we'll focus on what people don't do or kids are doing wrong. Companies do this with their employees. So it's naturally kind of wired to focus on the negative. To combat this, to live in a world where now we don't have to worry about, for the most part, anybody listening to this probably doesn't have to worry about the threat of life on a day-to-day basis. Now, of course, there are people in our human family who do have to worry about that, but many of us, at least if you have the luxury to listen to a podcast like this, you're not worrying about the threat to your life. Our lifespans are way longer than they used to be. So now we have a future to look forward to. So to live into this desired future, we have to combat wiring in our brains that is not designed for a peaceful life, an actual long life, a future. And that means you have to consciously channel into thinking about what is the positive or turning that negative into something beautiful. Like even with going to Antarctica, it is very valuable for me to think about what could go wrong. It's
Mhm.
incredibly valuable. And in fact, I do that very consciously. I even created a problem and solution list. I think about, and I think everybody should do this. Astronauts actually call this negative visualization. So they visualize everything that could go wrong so they can prepare for it. So we've all heard of positive visualization, right? Visualize the outcome you want. And that's a beautiful thing, but similar to the dualities, they can coexist. So I do this too. I will visualize myself crossing the finish line, succeeding, but I also visualize every single thing that can go wrong so I can now prepare for those things. Just the other day, I woke up and subconsciously I was thinking of what if I spill fuel? And I don't have the luxury to spill fuel in Antarctica. So I got a funnel with the bigger mouth. So
Okay.
because I was thinking of something that could go wrong, I found a solution to that. thinking about what could go wrong and channeling that negativity bias in a healthy way, but also combating it when you need to look at, all right, there can also be positives. This can also turn out beautiful. And then channeling your mind to direct it consciously instead of being a slave to your mind. It's about seizing control of your mind so you can direct it where you want it to go instead of letting it go where it goes without your control.
All of these insights are really helpful, especially for folks out there who are struggling to turn their mind around, to rise up and get out of the emotional muck that they might be stuck in. Will you talk to us a little bit about your perspective on your top of mind rule?
The top of mind rule, yeah, these are all cognitive biases that I talk about, and I believe I list 7 in the book. There's like way more, 25 that I have listed in the resources site. So the top of mind rule is what will be top of mind is how we shape our reality. They've done all these studies on how we assess risk. So for example, if I live in an area with tornadoes and a tornado hits, that becomes now top of mind, and I will view that as a higher risk than other things which statistically will have actually a way higher risk than said tornado. With these cognitive biases, they all exist to keep us alive. That is the brain's number one function, is to keep us alive, not to keep us happy, not to keep us fulfilled. So you have to think about that. All right, whatever is top of mind is, if I'm reading about, this is why we're talking about the news. If I look only at the news, what's going to be top of mind? The top of mind rule is that the world is terrible, human beings are evil, this, that, and the other thing. But now if I change that, if I control what information feeds into my mind, it changes what is top of mind, right? So you want to control the paradigm and the references that shape your reality. So I'm very conscious of shaping my own references because beliefs will shape our own reality, right? It's how we view the world is not based on how we actually view the world. It's based on the lens through which we view the world. That is why two people can be in the same room in the same reality and view it very differently, right? We could be at the same event, like the event where we met. One person could be like, this is the worst event ever. I hate everybody in this room. And another person could be like, this is the best event ever. And I love everybody in this room. Because our paradigms are shaped by the experiences, the beliefs that create the lens of reality. So as coming back to everything I've said, like the first step, the first section of the book is awareness and acceptance. Let me become aware of the paradigm and then accept it in order to reframe it. The second section of the book is action. Action doesn't just mean physical action, but it also means conscious action. So I talk about the science of neuroplasticity in the book. How do you change your brain's ability to relate to the world? And you can physically change how your brain actually is. And you start by using conscious effort, conscious energy. So that could mean, let me turn off the news. It could mean, let me focus on the positive. Let me focus on the outcome that I want to create. Let me focus on recognizing, hey, like if I grew up in a world where every day there was dangers, there was threats, and then now I'm in a safe environment, I'm still going to have a belief that the world is dangerous, that people are out to kill me. That's a valuable belief because I grew up in a world where people actually did want to kill me. So it's important to acknowledge and accept that it's not bad or wrong or anything. It exists for a reason. Got it. Now that I'm aware that this is a paradigm, this is not quote unquote real, this is a lens that shapes my reality. What lens do I want to choose? Like even when I got into ultra running, there's a belief that running a marathon is a huge race. Now, I'm not saying it's not for somebody who's run it, but when I started running 50 milers, 100 milers, 24-hour runs, a marathon became like nothing, only because my belief around it changed. I had a paradigm that shifted because I was exposed to new references, to new information. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So when you talk about this neuroplasticity, in your opinion, as a superhuman power, or it's something that we can all utilize to become the best, highest versions of ourselves possible. And I know that you utilize this specifically to overcome your own anxiety, PTSD, depression, guilt, shame, etc. So can you talk to us a little bit about a formula that you use specifically to enhance your neuroplasticity?
So start with, what is neuroplasticity? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself at a very basic level. And what that means is, and why this is so important, why this is a quote unquote superpower, is that wherever we are, we can change that. Because our brain, the physical structure of our brain, shapes our consciousness, shapes our perception of reality, and vice versa. Our perception of reality shapes the brain. But when we change one, it can change the other. So they actually did a study that they showed taxi drivers in London had a larger hippocampus, a part of the brain associated with memory, than the rest of us because they have to memorize very complex streets in London. So what does that tell us? Depending on your reality, it changes the physical structure of the brain, and vice versa. By changing our reality through conscious effort, we can change the physical structure of the brain. So one of the core formulas, the core principles of neuroplasticity is what's called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. Neurons that fire together wire together. So when you think of something long enough, over time, you create new neurons that fire together. So as an example, I was working with a client who every time he would sit down on the computer to write, he would get anxious. He would start sweating because he would feel like very nervous. Now, he came to me, and the first thing everybody would tell him, like, okay, well, how do we get rid of the anxiety? And my thing was, that's not what we're going to do, because right now you don't control it. At a very simplistic level, your brain has created a relationship that says sitting on computer equals anxiety. You don't control that response anymore. Just as if somebody were to come into this room right now with a gun, I don't control the fact that I would feel fear. I'm going to feel it. We don't control it. So the goal is not to fight and to resist and to demonize what we don't control. We're going to accept it. Got it. Be with it. The only way out is through. That's one of my core mantras. The only way out is through. So you have to be with it. So for this client, all right, we're just going to sit with the anxiety, and I just want you to acknowledge it. Just be with it. Don't demonize it. Label it. Neuroscience has actually even shown that when we label an emotion, it reduces activity in the emotional part of the brain and increases activity in the part of the brain related to focus and awareness. So essentially, we stop becoming a slave to our emotions, right? There's a space between our emotion and who we choose to be outside of that emotion. Now, if you don't train in that space, this is why people are reactive. So I will feel anger and I will get angry. Whereas if I master that space, I can feel anger and choose not to get angry. Or I can choose to get angry because controlled rage has its place, right? So, but you can choose how you react to that emotion, how you respond to it, instead of being a slave to it. So the first step, recognizing there is a space, label it. God, I feel anxious. And with this client, I would just have him write for 2 minutes, not even an hour, not nothing, just 2 minutes. Because now we have to reshape that pattern. So once it's over time, now the new neurons are firing together. Over time, we built a pattern that said sitting on the computer equals joy, equals happiness. Now I can move through it. And eventually, at first, we couldn't control the anxiety, but eventually the anxiety goes away. Even for me, when I first came back to the war, I was very hyper vigilant of loud noises. I did not like being in crowds. Even that event where we met, I couldn't have handled that when I first came back from the war. I couldn't control that at first, but over time, by simply being with it and choosing to move through it, I created new neurons that fire together.
That makes sense. I really appreciate how you are able to toggle between joy and fear. Like you are able to, or joy and suffering, you're able to take, it seems like, any aspect of suffering and figure out how to transmute it over to the joy factor for you by just how you're playing with your brain and how you are framing different situations. Can you talk to us a little bit more about how somebody else who might be dealing with these things could frame their day in a different way, or their circumstance of life, or what's happened with them with death or things that they feel shouldn't have occurred in their life?
So that key thing you mentioned, that this shouldn't have occurred, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all do that. I wish it didn't happen this way. The first step, I can't stress this enough, is awareness and acceptance. So, okay, this thing happened. Acceptance of isness is the foundation to freedom from all suffering, unnecessary suffering. We can't reduce suffering's going to happen in life, but the unnecessary suffering is the dialogue we have about that suffering. So this shouldn't have happened. I wish this didn't. And so actually a good example of this is what I even talk about this in the book is second dart syndrome. So Buddha said we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. The first dart is the one we don't control. Let's say my friend dying in the war. I couldn't control that. The second dart is what we do with that thing that happens. And this is the dialogue we have around this. Why did this happen to me? Why do bad things happen to me? Why does God hate me? The world is evil. The world is terrible, right? That second dart is that downward spiral of the negativity bias playing into that we can all relate to, right? We can recognize we've all experienced our mind going into that downward spiral. The key to freeing ourselves from that downward spiral is to pause and accept what is. Accept what is. And accept what is not only means acceptance of external stimuli, like my friend dying in the war, but acceptance of the internal stimuli beyond my control. So when I mentioned I was struggling with loud noise in crowds, at first I couldn't control that. Instead of calling that a disorder, this is what I did, right? I recognized that I had post-traumatic stress, yes, but post-traumatic stress does not mean post-traumatic stress disorder. By choosing to ascribe the label of disorder to it, now I believe there's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? I have a disorder. But I spent 7 months in a war zone. Obviously, I was hypervigilant of loud noises. Because that kept me alive. I needed to be hypervigilant. That's not a disorder. That's a normal human response to war, right? So
Right.
first is awareness and acceptance. I feel pain because I lost somebody, if somebody's listening to this. got it. Let me be with it. Let me sit with it. Now, that is horribly uncomfortable, right? Like, there's nothing easy about this. I cannot stress that enough. Like, I was working with a woman, had PTSD from the Boston bombing, and we were talking about different ways to move through it. And I said, all right, next time you feel hypervigilant from a loud noise hitting you, I just want you to pause and just acknowledge that you're feeling anxiety. And she said, yeah, but that's so hard. And I said, I know that's hard. And it's not her fault, right? Like, I'm not demonizing this woman, but she wanted to get to the other side of it without moving through that discomfort. And you just
Yeah.
can't. That's the
Yeah.
key thing. Like, that's why the whole essence of Fearvana, there's even a chapter in the book called The Gift of Suffering. You have to be able to sit with discomfort of the human experience, because if you don't, you're going to suffer anyway. Like, if you, one way or the other, we're going to suffer. So you got to choose which suffering you want to endure, right? Do I want to endure the suffering of going through this deep angst of the quiet desperation of the human experience? Or do I want to move through it, go through a little bit of suffering and find freedom on the other side? So awareness and acceptance is the foundation. Like, even when I'm on expedition, I was on solo expedition in Norway, and there was a lot of soft snow, and it's easy. Soft snow makes it very, very hard to drag a sled. So it's easy to say, I wish the snow was better. I wish the weather was better. I wish there was harder snow. But instead, I kept saying to myself, thank you, God, for these perfect conditions. Thank you, God, for these perfect conditions. And they were perfect because that's what they were, right? So remembering that, if there's one thing you take away this, what I'm about to say. Everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. I'll say that again. Everything is perfect in its isness because it cannot be anything other than what it already is. You cannot change the past. You lost somebody. You went through some horrific trauma. And it's hard to wrap your head around it being perfect, but it's perfect because that's the way it happened. You can't change that, right? This is the isness of the condition. I lost friends. I went through all this. I've been through a brutal divorce. I've been through all kinds of pain, right? It happened. It's perfect. It happened. That's the isness of it. Now, once I accept that the isness, then I can free myself from those second darts and say, got it. Now what do I do with it? That's when I can say, I can turn my guilt into something beautiful. That's when I can turn it into a paradigm that I owe a debt for this life and I'm going to make this life worthy. That's what I can say, I can earn this life, right? So you can turn your pain into something beautiful and then channel it into, that's why the second section of the book is action. And the third section is awakening. Because when you do that, when you have that awareness, acceptance, you take purposeful action, you lead to new awakenings, to new insights. But acceptance of isness is the foundation to release all, and that means also not demonizing. So there's no bad emotions, there's no good emotions, there's no bad experiences, there's no good experiences. There's only emotions, there's only experiences, and it's up to us to decide what we do with them.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
For anybody who is really struggling with fear in any aspect of their life, what is like the one thing that you would share with them about how to deal with, sit with, move through fear?
First, it's okay to be scared. Stop beating yourself up because you are scared. And many people do this. I should not feel this way. I should not feel anxious. I should not be scared. Because how many times do you hear people say, don't be scared of failure? And that's nonsense. Like, I'm scared of failure. I'm terrified of failure, right? So first, it's okay that you're scared. Okay, God, I'm feeling scared. Now find some way to move through that fear. Take some purposeful action. That's how you build confidence. You do something that pushes you outside your comfort zone, that is scary, that is uncomfortable, and then how you talk to yourself after that thing is done. So as I mentioned, I was scared of heights. I was scared of tight spaces. I was scared of asking a woman out, but you have to move through it. The only way out is through. So if you are scared, look, you don't have to cross Antarctica, but do a small thing. Do a very, very, very small thing that is scary. If you're scared of heights, going into a rock climbing gym and be on rope, climb a few feet higher than you're comfortable with. And then you start building yourself, right? Okay. And then celebrating. The key thing is, when building confidence, is two steps. One is doing something that stretches you. And then two, how you talk to yourself after that thing is done. And that's a vital piece that's often missed out on. Because I used to be the kind of person, if I ran 10 miles, I'd be pissed off I didn't run 20. If I ran 20, I'd be pissed off I didn't run 30. And that's a miserable way to live. So
Yeah.
you do the thing, right? What I was saying earlier, stack the win. But in order to, you have to acknowledge it as a win. Hey, I did this today. I went 5 feet up that rock wall. I'm awesome. I'm stoked. I'm celebrating that win. Talk to yourself in the mirror, reframe that negativity bias, and start celebrating how awesome you are, right? Ego, for example, is another thing. Coming back to the duality, ego, humility. If you want to be great, you have to believe you are great. I have tremendous ego, but I also have tremendous humility. I'm always looking for where's the gap? What can I learn? How can I learn from other people, right? Other people around me. But in order to do this, I have to believe I'm the hardest, strongest human being alive, and I believe that. I do know that. I believe that firmly. I talk to myself that way. But that ability has come from doing a lot of hard things. So wherever you are, you're in your journey, work your way up that ladder of fear one small step at a time. One small step. Like even my wife did this. She used to feel really anxious about talking to people, so she stepped into it. She would walk up to men at the gym just to start a conversation. Scary, right? It is scary to do that. I get scared doing that to this day. I mean, now I'm married, but like before, right before, I was scared doing that. So do those little things that scare you, and you start building yourself up.
One of the things that we talk about in our community are healthy lifestyle choices. And I've interviewed hundreds of doctors now. And at this point, like there are a few common themes every single day that we hear from experts who are spending their days focusing on helping individuals achieve optimum health, wellness. And one of those things is daily movement. You are training like a wild beast for this journey. I know you are.
Yeah.
And you're utilizing C60 as part of your training journey. Can you just talk to our audience a little bit about your perspective on utilizing exercise, moving your body to work through some of these tough emotional states and transmute them? I guess my real question is, how important has exercise and your physical output of energy been in terms of supporting your own internal journey of restructuring yourself to get this amazing mindset that you have?
It has been my salvation exercise. One neuroscientist said if you could put the effects of exercise into a pill, it would be the best-selling pill of all time for mental health and conquering depression. So I cannot stress enough the value of doing something physical to get, like in behavior science, they call it a keystone habit. What's one habit that would be the most powerful habit to have an effect on all other habits? And I would say exercise is the most valuable keystone habits. When I was doing one-on-one coaching, I'm not anymore. I wouldn't work with the client if they weren't willing to implement some sort of exercise like regimen, no matter how small, no matter how big. It doesn't have to be my exercise regimen, but some
Mm-hmm.
exercise regimen. So wherever you are, just start somewhere. That will help move your mind. Like I said, I had one client where we were just doing 5 push-ups, right? Most of us might not think that's a lot, but that's okay. Like for him, it was a lot, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
needs to be done. So I think it is one of the most important things you can do to better your mind, body, spirit, because it's the only thing that actually taps into mind, body, spirit. When you meditate, you're not working physically, but when you exercise hard, you're going to push your mind as well as your body. So it's the one thing that taps into mind, body, spirit simultaneously and allows you to rebuild yourself from the ground up into whoever you then want to become.
It's amazing. Akshay, you have given us so much to think about over this last hour. And I would really like to understand how our community can pour into you. I understand that you've got 30 days left with your goal of raising money for your amazing adventure. So if you don't mind sharing the website that we can
Sure.
go to or
Yeah.
your GoFundMe page here, I'm going to have our team pop it right here down below where we can go and support you with your amazing journey. If you would also please speak to the best places, perhaps it's just Amazon, but where people can go
Yeah.
buy Fearvana and learn more about the secrets that you have uncovered that you're sharing with the world about how do we go from suffering to joy and how do we utilize depression, anxiety, fear as rocket fuel to
Yeah.
propel our lives forward into our best and brightest that we're capable of creating.
Sure. Thank you, firstly, for asking and for the support. You can find the book Fearvana in Kindle, paperback, Audible on Amazon, fearvana.com, and Fearvana at Instagram is where I share a lot of the lessons and the journey throughout all these decades of playing on the edges. And on fearvana.com, there's also a link to our crowdfunding campaign at greatsoulcrossing.com. That's great, SOUL, crossing.com. And that's where we have crowdfunding campaign to fund this expedition. It costs $1.1 million to make this happen. The reason being is there's a lot that goes into this. It's the most unforgiving environment, and to doing anything in Antarctica takes a lot of challenges. And to fund the flights down there, the staff down there, the safety team out there, it takes a lot to do a 110-day expedition completely alone, and a lot of people coming together. So We have raised just about 1.1 million right now. We have just under 25K to go to hit the home stretch. So any support and any donation, it all adds up. It really makes a difference. And I'm also giving away various sort of my mindset tools that go deeper into some of the things we've talked about at various donation tiers. There's rewards for each donation tier. So any support, any little bit really helps and really makes a difference. So thank you so much for
That's awesome.
support, Jess. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm honored to know you. I'm so blessed that our paths have crossed. You are an inspiration to humanity. On behalf of our whole community, I want to wish you the very best. Good luck, Godspeed. And we can't wait for you to come back so you can share with us some of the profound insights, revelations, realizations that you are able to hear from your soul, from God, from the universe when you're out there in the great white open. So, Akshay, any final statements or sharings for our listeners, just about anybody who is feeling down, stuck, struggling? Because certainly you've been there, I've been there. There is a way out. Any final words
Yeah.
of hope?
You just to your point, there is a way out. I mean, no matter where you are, you can find a way through. Be with the pain. Pain is not your enemy. It's hard. It is, that's the nature of pain. It's challenging, but the only way out is through. So seek out your next edge, because if you don't seek out a next edge, life is going to punch you in the face anyway. And the only way to find freedom, to find peace, to find joy, to find fulfillment is to move through it, to find a next edge. And that's where you'll find everything you're looking for on the other side of that pain and the struggle.
Akshay, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Really appreciate you.